And our next presentation is the problems. Sorry, I'm just setting up the live transcription. Sorry about that. So the next presentation is the problems with database subject lists, early career librarians' approach to creating a more user-centered framework. And your presenters are Andrea McMillan and Eric Ponder.
Oh, Eric, you're muted.
Thanks. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. For our presentation today, we will be discussing the problems with subject database lists. As subject librarians, this is a project that we worked on to bring better visibility to ethnic studies related library resources. We approached this work from a dual lens as early career librarians and librarians of color. Again, my name is Eric Ponder. My pronouns are he, his, and him. I am the African and U.S. Ethnic Studies librarian at Michigan State University, and I'm into my 30.5 years at Michigan State.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea McMillan. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the Chicanx and Latinx Studies librarian at Michigan State University, and I'm in my 3rd year there as a librarian. So to get started in talking about the changes we advocated for within the subject database lists, here's a little bit of background to set the scene. The work we did happened during the fall semester of 2019. At that time, I was a little less than a year in my new role as the Chicanx and Latinx Studies librarian. And Eric's role had also expanded around that time from being the African Studies librarian to now including African American Studies, American Indian and Indigenous Studies, Asian American and Pacific Islander Studies, and Arab American Studies. As early career librarians working within our new collections and liaison duties, we were both in the process of reviewing and updating related resource guides for our areas. Part of our goals were to remove outdated links and information and provide opportunities for discovery and access to resources without overwhelming the user with excessive content. Since many of our guides were closely connected to each other, we worked together through some of this process, and eventually we turned our attention to the database subject lists.
Michigan State University has 5 ethnic studies related programs, which include American Indian and Indigenous Studies, Asian Pacific American Studies Program, Chicano Latino Studies, the Department of African American and African Studies, and a minor in race and ethnicity in the United States. These programs of study include 2 PhD programs, 4 graduate certificate programs, 5 undergraduate minors, and 5 undergraduate minors. More significantly, these programs are dispersed throughout the various colleges within the university, and they all bring their own unique history to the university. As ethnic study librarians, Andrea and I are responsible for these areas of study. One critical question as the 2 of us embark on our new roles as librarians at MSU is how we engage and service these areas of study in new and thoughtful ways, which means analyzing how we currently provide library services to our constituents.
So the subject list that we looked at resides within the A to Z database list, which contains links to the library's e-resources. In 2014, the Electronic Resources team and LibGuides team performed an overhaul of the library website that included paring down an unwieldy database list of over 2,000 entries to around 895 entries. Along with this change also came the ability to search the list by subject, database type, and vendor. Even with this major overhaul, searching by subject shows some areas continue to have lengthy lists of e-resources. In this screenshot showing what the lists would have looked like in 2017, we can see that the subject area of ethnic studies had 64 entries and other areas showing entries well over 50. While the subject lists offer a best bets feature that allows the library to highlight specific platforms, users may still find it overwhelming or challenging to locate additional options through the list. Within the ethnic studies list, this feature highlighted a general resource to try and encompass the specific subject areas under this one umbrella.
We posit that it is critically important, especially as early career librarians, to assess past practices and policies of our subject areas. Always asking yourself, are we providing the best service possible? Ascertain the historical relationship and structure between the library and academic departments. In this case, the approach to ethnic studies in previous years was viewed as an amalgam of departments and programs. These areas of study were not viewed as individual or unique academic units. By creating this catch-all or umbrella of disciplines, we create some structural limitations. One such limitation that was an outgrowth of previous practices is what we posit as the invisibility of subject-specific resources, and by proxy, their related areas of study. Having a singular ethnic studies database list does a huge disservice to the individual programs. At MSU, there is not one centralized ethnic studies department or program. As stated earlier, these programs are housed within different colleges within the university and have their own curriculum and focus. We wanted the database subject list to explicitly reflect the programs and departments on campus that we support. The library has done a lot in acquiring diverse collections and resources, but we wanted to continue moving towards creating an inclusive environment by explicitly representing these programs online within the library. Outside of LibGuides, we create and manage.
These are the objectives we outlined and presented to the Associate Deans of Collections and Public Services in our proposal to restructure the list. The first objective we hoped to work towards was aiding in the discoverability of databases. During research consultations I had with graduate students, it had come up a couple of times that there was confusion on where to find Chicanx and Latinx studies databases. For example, one student thought all that was available was under Latin American and Caribbean studies. When I pointed to ethnic studies, they didn't realize to even look within this subject list. The second objective we wanted to accomplish was providing better support to our liaison departments and programs by clearly identifying resources pertaining to their research areas. And in relation to our peers, the changes would be in step with other Big Ten institutions. These institutions demonstrated excellent examples of organizing resources within an inclusive and more defined approach.
Our attempt to reorganize the ethnic studies database list comes with two main goals in mind. One is to provide better discoverability to the library's electronic resources, and two is to keep the end user needs in mind as they navigate the library webpage searching for information. On its face, the ethnic studies database list was a long, meandering collection of resources that we suggest did not serve the needs of any of our users. There is considerable literature available that discusses redesigning library web pages to make them more discoverable to users. The literature discusses usability and the need to create resources that are effective, efficient, and learnable. The key to reorganizing the database list is to be user-centric. By reorganizing the list to be subject-specific, we were able to provide better descriptors, labels, and smaller searchable collections. What we have also learned from the literature are the user's needs of undergraduates, and more specifically, underrepresented students. We know and understand the research anxiety that many students have. It is important that students can find information quickly with fewer barriers as possible. In the end, our database list should facilitate learning and not discourage it. Discoverability should always be a tenet in organizing library resources. As libraries continue to acquire more and more databases, there needs to be considerable thought in how we organize and promote them. We need to be cognizant of the amount of funds we invest in new databases and ensure that they are visible and available for use.
So part of making our case for reorganizing was to better align with descriptive and inclusive approaches practiced at other Big Ten institutions. We created a list of the Big Ten libraries and the database categories they used. We found that 9 out of the 13 libraries used multiple categories for ethnic studies related subject areas. After noticing variations in general ethnic studies categories from the Big Ten libraries, we then looked at other R1 institutions for examples of ethnic studies categories. We were interested in learning what were some of the common descriptions being used for this area.
As Andrea stated in the previous slide, we conducted some research with our academic peers, as well as with Big Ten universities to ascertain how they were organizing and labeling their database subject lists. Our major objective was twofold. One, we wanted to align our subject databases with their academic departments and units. Two, we wanted to create a general tab or a designation for ethnic study databases that did not fit with a specific area of study. Above all, it was critically important to label the collection that would be identifiable to our undergraduates and easy to locate. Here in this slide, you can see various examples of how ethnic studies subject related databases are labeled at university libraries from across the country. Of course, every university is unique in its development of their areas of interest and educational philosophy. We here at MSU Libraries wanted to take particular care of how we labeled and organized ethnic study resources. It needed to fit within the university's academic structure. We decided upon race and ethnicity as it corresponds with a minor degree program in the College of Social Sciences.
So here are the final outcomes from our original project. When we started, there were 70 databases listed under the term ethnic studies. We broke this term out initially into the 4 categories of African American studies, Chicanx/Latinx studies, Native American and Indigenous studies, and race and ethnicity. Asian American studies was included a couple of months after our first change. Along with the listing databases specific to these subject areas, we made the decision to also include some of the general ethnic study databases found under race and ethnicity within these other lists as well. For example, Ethnic Newswatch and Independent Voices are found in most of these lists. We wanted to make sure that these lists were comprehensive for each subject and reduce the need for a user to search between multiple lists, though of course that could still happen given the multidisciplinary nature of these areas.
So, what have we learned by making these changes? Anecdotally, we have received positive feedback from both our colleagues and students. The changes were made a year and a half ago, so there is still a good deal to learn about the efficacy of these changes. One example of positive feedback has been through our instructional sessions, working with students in navigating the subject area database list. As far as data collection, we would like to glean some longitudinal data to gain a sense of before and after information on findability and usage. How many hits are these pages currently receiving? Are students finding what they need to do their research? As noted earlier, we wanted to make searching for subject-related databases more intuitive and effective. if an undergraduate student is searching for a database that focuses on African American studies or Chicano Latino studies, it will now be easier to find with new restructuring. But we understand that we still need to be cognizant of creating long and unruly subject lists. Like most libraries, MSU libraries, it's acquiring more and more databases. How do these resources get to their intended audience? Lastly, by going through this process, we also learned areas in which we are strong and weak in. We learned that there is a great deal we can do to bolster resources in Asian Pacific American studies. Are there resources currently available that we can acquire? As early career librarians, this is a perfect time to make those assessments as we move forward in our career.
So thank you so much for attending our presentation today. Our emails are listed here if you would like to connect with us virtually after the conference. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Eric and Andrea. And I invite anyone to ask a question. You could raise your hand or put something in the chat and we can moderate from there. I'll have to say I was chuckling with the word unruly because I'm at Western Michigan University and we just tried to tackle the same issue a couple of years ago, and it was really complicated to try to figure out what the user needed versus what we needed. And Eric, when you said these pages should be used to help facilitate learning, I was saying yes. So yeah, and not overly complicated. I have really appreciated this presentation. We have a few more minutes. We have about 5 minutes for question and answers. And we have one from Agnes. So Agnes says, we were considerably constrained in the past to not offer so many subject categories. I'm not sure why, but it was so. Agnes, I think we had that same pattern too. We were trying to think more broadly, but then when you think more broadly, you lose the nuance. Like students think in departments and classes. That's what we concluded. I guess I can turn on my camera. I'll do a screen. And one of the things we realized when we were assessing our databases page is we had that search box and people would use that as if it were our discovery tool. So they weren't searching for the name of the database, they were searching for an article within that database. And one of the huge improvements we made on our similar page was to rebrand that search feature to make sure people knew what they were actually searching there. We have a question from Gerald. I've seen the blog post in which the author had a problem even creating these specialized databases due to affordability and access issues. Interesting. Sophia?
Thank you for that presentation. I'm wondering, during your research and during the actual implementation, did anything really surprise you about this process? Did anything in the research really stand out to you as surprising, something that you didn't expect?
For me, I felt like, I think looking at the way that ethnic studies is categorized within database lists. On that slide, you saw things like social sciences general or American studies even, history was, I think, thrown in there. And so I think it was just a little bit more because it was listed as ethnic studies, but like we mentioned, we don't have an ethnic studies department here at MSU. And so we were trying, for us, it didn't really feel like ethnic studies was the right term to use. And so that was kind of like an interesting part, I think, when we were looking in is like, what did we want to call it? And initially for a minute we were thinking, oh, well, is this American Studies? And we had a discussion with the Associate Dean for Collections, and he asked us to think a little bit more about it because he told us, well, that really means something else. And so I think that was a really, I guess, like more unexpected, like of just what we were trying to think of. And then in the end, we realized, deciding to go with race and ethnicity made the most sense, especially given the minor program that we have here, and also what the content of those databases are really encompassing.
Thank you.
I think I would just add quickly that as early career librarians, and we're still working towards this goal of building our liaisons and working relationships with these various departments. So I would say that it's at times can be difficult to have these conversations with the various departments and get a foot in the door. So so we're working towards having better relationships and trying to understand or find out what their needs are. And as we mentioned in our presentation, we found that Asian Pacific American Studies is grossly under resourced. So how do we find additional resources to serve that study area? So there was most definitely some surprises. Thank you.
Okay, well, we're coming to the conclusion of this breakout session. So I want to thank our presenters. We have Eric, Andrea, and Sophia. Thank you so much. Please remember, or if you have a chance, stop by the portal to provide feedback for the surveys and the breakout for the speakers and the presentations. We would greatly appreciate it. And I'm going to stop recording, and I hope you're all having a great rest of the conference. I'll see you around. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
My pleasure.